Welcome, everybody. We have got an amazing and important interview coming up. You're not going to want to miss this one. So, welcome, everybody. Stick around, and we're going to have a really important interview. This is one I've been looking forward to having because I think it's a topic that has to be covered more. So, please stick around, and we'll be right back. I have an amazing guest lined up for you. Welcome, everybody. We are here back once again. Another important interview. As you guys know, I love to do interviews on important topics, bring it to you guys. I love to get guests on that are going to tell their stories. You know, I do this all the time, and I think it has to be done more. And you know, on this channel, I cover a lot of different topics. We have covered child, we've covered so many things. We've covered homeschooling. We've protecting children. We've covered satanic ritual abuse. People who have survived that have come on and told their story. Just so many important topics that we do cover here. And homeschooling, you guys know it. Anyone that's been following my channel for the last couple of years know the topics that I cover. And I wanted to get a guest on, somebody very important, has a great, important story to tell. And I was so thankful that they would take the time to come and speak with us and tell their story. They did write a book back in 2020 called Open Blind Eyes. And my guest is a survivor, of child trafficking, and from a teacher and a coach. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring my guest in and get into this and let her tell her story. Welcome, my guest, Rachel Timothy. Thank you, Rachel, for being here. This is an important topic, one that needs, I think, to be discussed way more than it is. It's starting to come out and be talked about now due to that movie, you know, The Sound of Freedom and stuff. So it is now, people are starting to talk about it, even in my groups of friends that kind of are looking at this, but not really. They're at least they're talking about it now. So thank you for being here to tell your story. This is important, I think.
Oh, thank you. I feel like it's super important and it's super under acknowledged in our country. They statistically are saying we're only recognizing 1% of trafficked
Wow.
victims in America. And so the more we talk about it, my hope is the more we will recognize it and the more that will get rescued.
Absolutely, I agree, and that's what I do pride myself on with my show that I do is these uncomfortable topics. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it, they don't like to listen to it, but I keep saying that I'm going to keep doing them because as you just said, I think that it has to get out there more. People have to be aware that this is going on, and it's way deeper than people think. I say that all the time. And, you know, we saw with Epstein Island things, you know, it's starting to come to the surface and people are starting to realize how deep this is and
Mhm.
how big the web is. I think a lot of people think it's just a surface layer thing, but as soon as you start interviewing people, hearing their story, and then you start diving into it, you realize that this is a worldwide problem, this web. And it runs deep.
It does. And it usually impacts people right there in your neighborhood. You know, often we think, oh, I'm glad this isn't happening here. Well, I'm telling you, it is. You just haven't seen it, and it's right around all of us.
Mhm.
That's my whole hope: open blind eyes, so that people can
Exactly.
see it
It's an
for what.
amazing title to a book too.
Mm.
I was saying that to my friend. I was like, "Wow, what a powerful title!"
Aw,
And
thank
it's
you.
and it gets right to the heart of it. So maybe that's a great place to start, Rachel. Like maybe you could start letting everybody know a little bit about yourself
Mhm.
and wherever you want to start the story of what happened to you, and we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I usually start sharing my story when I was at the age of 9, and I typically share the fact that when I was 9 years old, that's when I gave my life to the Lord and was baptized and all of that. And just, I was a preacher's kid. And so I was brought up in the church and I loved God and I had that childlike faith. Little did I know how it was going to be tested over the course of my life. And it didn't take long because it was probably 6 months later that my family, we moved. We moved to a small town, technically a village. It wasn't very big at all. It had a grade school, a high school, a couple churches, and literally that was it. And I lived walking distance from everything. And so here we are moving to this new town, and I'm 9 years old, and I'm going into the fourth grade. And I remember being super excited. I remember looking forward and seeing it as an adventure. And when I got to school, I was like any kid who hoped to make friends and
Hmm.
nervous about that process. But it wasn't that long into the school year when I was walking with my class to the lunchroom. And I remember the rules because I was very much a rule follower. You had to walk on the right hand side of the hallway, arm's length from the person in front of you, no
Hmm.
talking, all the things. And with being such a rule follower, whenever a teacher called me out of line, I immediately thought, oh, did I do something wrong? And I knew who the teacher was. He was actually the girls' basketball coach. So, this grade school that I was at, it was a K-8 school. And so he was the junior high varsity basketball coach.
Okay.
I was a tomboy, loved basketball. That was my heart. And so here he is. He's also the other fourth grade teacher, and he calls me out of line. And so I go over and talk to him, and immediately he greets me with a smile. He started to basically welcome me to the community, say that he was so excited that me and my family had moved to this town, that he was hoping that I would play basketball for him, that he heard my brothers were good athletes. He heard my dad got the preaching position. And oh, he heard my cousin was this amazing basketball player. And I say all of that because he had done his homework on me. Before our first conversation, he had already figured out what I liked, which was basketball, and
Hmm.
all about my family, even to my extended family. And so, I often will say that this whole grooming process where he
Right.
was preparing me for the abuse that he was going to bring me into, it started before our first conversation. And honestly, I feel like the grooming process started years before when he started to prep the community for him. He got the community believing that he was this great guy. He was an elder of a church, coach, teacher, all these things, and everybody trusted him. And so when they would see him with little girls, they wouldn't question him because they had already been groomed into believing he was a good guy. And
That,
so,
wow. I'm just thinking, Rachel, that's a great point that you bring up. It's something that I don't think a lot of people talk about. So I'm really glad that you're bringing that up. I certainly never thought of it that way. That they're not just groom. It's really creepy that he groomed you. He knew, he was even grooming, like starting the grooming process so quickly, and did his research on you. But you make a really powerful statement when you say that he groomed the community. I don't think a lot of
mhm.
people realize that. Like, it's not like he's like hiding in the shadows and people are aware of him. He's in the community. He's out and about mingling with the people and grooming them. That's so powerful that you said that.
Yeah, yeah, I believe he groomed them so that they could trick my family into believing he was safe and good. Like it goes deep. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, that was my initial conversation with him. From there, he started to then move the grooming process into making me feel special. And again, it's not this guy that you would think, it's not stranger danger. It's
Hmm.
somebody who makes you feel good about yourself. And he was 35-ish years old, and I was 9 years old. And anytime somebody makes you feel special, whether you have a broken home life or not, because I didn't, I had a great home life, it still is something that makes you feel good, something
Hmm.
you're naturally drawn to. And so he started to send another student from his class to my classroom and would see if I could get out of class to go sit with him behind his desk and just talk. And, the little girl would bring a note and my teacher would say, yeah, that's fine. And so I would go into his classroom, and oftentimes he would have the lights off. That was something that I recognized about him. Um, he liked the dark, and his blinds were always shut. He seemed to be playing a movie often. Now, granted, it was probably just on Fridays, but it was just a regular Disney movie, pretty much every Friday. And so I would go in his classroom and I would sit behind his desk and we would talk about basketball, about, how he thought I was going to be this pro and this all-star. In fact, he started calling me his little all-star. Um, he made me feel really good about myself. And in the beginning, it just started off with talking about basketball, which was my heart.
Mm-hmm.
But from there, then he started to talk to me about my looks and that he thought I was pretty. And he started to talk to me about how I could get stronger for basketball, so how my muscles could get stronger, and he would feel on my muscles, give me different workouts to do at home. But I remember the first time he touched me inappropriately, I was behind his desk and he had his hand under my shirt on my back, and then he went around and he touched my chest. And I wasn't developed whatsoever at that point, but
Mm-hmm.
I immediately jumped and tears filled my eyes. And I remember he said to me, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that was an accident. Why are you acting like a baby?" And I thought, oh,
Wow.
of course it was an accident. Like, he's a
Mm-hmm.
good guy. Why am I acting like this? That's just silly. But then he started to talk to me about secrets. And he would tell me, if you tell anybody about us, then he will lose his job, his wife, and his kid. And I think it's interesting because often we believe that maybe the perpetrator threatens the kid, threatens their family. But what he said to me was, I wanted to protect him. I didn't want to hurt him. I had grown to care about him. I thought he cared about me. I didn't want to lose this relationship. And so those words alone made it to where I was going to keep quiet about him and I.
Wow. I'm
And
just
so, oh, go
very
ahead.
just. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking and how it's the love bombing and I'm just I hope I that's why I think this is such a powerful conversation, Rachel, that has to be had, is that you're really breaking down the process. Like I think a lot of people, I don't think they wonder how does this even happen, and how does this even begin, and you're just bringing up great points and starting right back, like you said, from the community, and now how he's love bombing you, like
Yeah,
telling you everything a little young. And you're right. I remember back in public school, I wanted to feel special anytime the teacher would call me to the desk, or I would be part of behind even going behind the teacher's desk. I remember was a big thing. That was kind of like
exactly.
it was and I'm just, you gotta put yourself in the mind of a 9-year old.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And it wasn't just love bombing, though. Some of the mental abuse that he did and emotional abuse is sometimes he would be all about me and he would call me into his class often. And sometimes he would have absolutely nothing to do with me. He would
Oh,
act like I
really?
didn't even exist. And so it began this war within me of, I need him to want to pay attention to me. And it was a mind game. I remember thinking more about him than what a regular 9-year-old should be thinking, school and sports and
Hmm.
friends. I was worried, okay, he's mad at me. Why is he mad at me? What can I do to make him like me again? And so it was a lot of mind games. But I remember one time I was behind his desk and he brought one of his old yearbooks to school and he showed me a picture of him when he would have been about my age. And he asked me if I thought he was cute. And he asked if I would have dated him if we were the same age.
That's
And I
weird.
remember saying yes. And it was almost in that moment as if we were boyfriend, girlfriend. And honestly, if you were to ask my classmates nowadays, they would say, yeah, we knew you guys were boyfriend, girlfriend. Like, it was just a common thing. And I have learned also that teachers had walked in, like one teacher in particular walked in when I was sitting on his lap behind his desk in the dark, and she saw it. And then she turned around and immediately went to the superintendent.
Hmm.
And she told the superintendent what she saw. And he said, you don't need to worry about him. He's a safe guy. Just let it go. Like, nothing was done. And so, as I was sitting there with him that time with the yearbook, he then kind of came up with this plan of how I could come to his house. So he only lived 2 houses down from me. And he said, tell you what, take this book home and ask your mom if you can return this book to your teacher on Saturday. And so I asked, and mom said that's fine. And so I walked over to his house to give him his yearbook. And this first time I was at his house, like it went fine. He gave me a tour of the house, he gave me a snack, he showed me his music room, and basically flirted with me. And again, like as a kid, picture yourself as a 9-year old. When I know what with my kids, when they run into a teacher at the grocery store, it's a big deal. Like, oh my
Mhm.
goodness, my teacher actually goes shopping at Walmart too. Like, it's a big deal. And
It
so
is.
being in his house was a big deal. You really felt special. And so he started to come up with other plans, devising ways for me to go to his house. And after that, it was more lying on my behalf to my parents. Like I would ride my bike around town, and instead of doing that the whole time, I would stop in at his house, or I would go over to a friend's house across the street. And instead of staying there the whole time, I would walk over to his house. I remember one time when I was there, I was in his living room and he pulled out an envelope of pictures, and it was pictures of kids, and he was talking about how you can make money taking pictures, and that he said I was more beautiful than all of these kids, and it would help him pay bills, and it would maybe I could get my kid or my parents a Christmas gift. And so I said okay, and so we went in his bedroom. He had 3 disposable cameras sitting on his desk or on his dresser, and he just started taking my picture, and he was goofy and acting like a professional photographer and doing goofy poses, and it was fun. And I
Mhm.
remember talking to him at school then later on, and he said, I got the pictures back and they were good, but I think they could be better. And I had no idea what that meant.
Right.
And then the next time I was at his house, he pulled out an envelope of pictures, and they were again of kids, but this time the kids didn't have any clothes on. And I think he saw the look on my face because immediately he said, this is just the beautiful way that God made them. We're actually showing God's beauty whenever we take pictures like this. Like it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I trusted him as a
Mhm.
teacher, as a coach, as an elder. I trusted him that this was truly a good thing. I trusted what he was saying, even though my gut was screaming, no, like this doesn't feel right.
Right.
So we went in his bedroom and I allowed him to take pictures of me without clothes on. And over the course of time, like I started to feel icky about it.
Right.
And I remember saying to him, I don't feel good about that. And he said, well, you were the one who wanted to take your clothes off. Like it was your idea. And I remember thinking, like, it's that gaslighting. I remember thinking, was it? Was it my idea? And so shame really started to set in. And again, it's all on purpose. When
Right.
these perpetrators groom children, they don't veer from the usual path. Like they're all very similar. They know how to manipulate a child's heart and mind and soul to where they get control over them and their body. And a child has no defense to stop it. They really don't. Like,
Mhm.
it's not fair at all. And I've
Yeah.
had to deal with that a lot, looking back, thinking, I should have known better. I should have said something. But really, that it just wasn't even possible. A child's mind is not able to do those things. And so,
Exactly. It doesn't process stuff like that at that age. Like you just
exactly.
don't. And you bring up a lot of I think things that are very important because as you were saying, like they know what they're doing. This isn't like they perfected this technique of the grooming process.
Yes.
And I think people have to realize that. And what I find really disturbing is that how he got you to start you like that when you brought out that when you would lie to your parents and you would lie to people just to go over and see them and to do things. He made you part of it, like, and I'm
Hmm.
not sure how to word it, like I'm trying to think of what that would even be called, but he's definitely got you participating. You're the one doing the lying and going to see him. It's almost like he's how do I? It's like he's making you guilty. Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
he's made. It's like it was your idea.
Yeah,
Like, and then that's why I thought it was really surprising, Rachel, when you said that, like then he's questioning you, well, you wanted to do this. And then you're like, wait a minute, it's just so evil.
it
What?
is. It
Wow.
is.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, with being from a good family and being a preacher's kid and knowing right and wrong,
Hmm.
I think he knew that that would keep me silent.
Wow.
So after that, I was over at his house another time. And this time when I got there, he was not the only one there. His brother was there. And I quickly learned that my coach was kind of, if you looked at it as like a good cop, bad cop, like he was the good cop. He was very, friendly, made you feel special, made you feel good. The brother was the bad cop. He was a jerk. He was mean, and I was terrified of him. Um, and so here he was in the corner of my coach's bedroom with a camera on a tripod. And that time I was showed what making love was, according to the words of my coach. And it was all recorded by the brother. And I remember afterwards being cleaned up and my coach saying to me, the Bible says that the two become one and that I then belonged to him. And I was also told things like, if there's blood in your underwear, make sure you throw them away before your mom sees it, like all of these things. And I don't know how to explain the darkness that just all of a sudden engulfs you. And
Mm.
like you said, a child's mind can't process that.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I have oftentimes tried to defend the reason as to why I couldn't always remember those bad things that he did. I know at times I disassociated. In fact, a lot of times I disassociated because that was a protective measure that I think
Hmm.
God blesses us with.
I
Uh,
agree.
but in many ways, I then wasn't able to tell people what was going on because I fully hadn't processed it or dealt with it or recognized it. And so from there, he also brought in some other people into the house at times when I was there, and I was forced to make love with them. But when I was then in the fifth and sixth grade year, I was now on his basketball team. Excuse me. And one day at the very beginning of school, he called me down to talk to him. And he said, "Hey, I got exciting news. You're going to get to go practice up at the high school today instead of practicing here at the grade school." And I was super excited. He
No.
said there'll be
Yeah.
a car out back. They're going to pick you up, take you over to the high school. And then when practice is done, you'll come back here and you'll be able to be picked up by your parents. And I was pumped. And so
That's a
after
big deal for a young girl, right? Going to the high
yeah,
school, and wow, I'm thinking if I was that age, I'd be like, oh my god.
yes, like super excited.
Yeah.
And so I got dressed, ready for practice, and I remember even just running and to my coach and him saying, "Okay, the car's out back." And so I went out the back door and there stood his brother. And so I basically knew at that point, okay, I'm probably not going to the high school. Whatever this is going to be bad. And the brother told me to get in the back and to lay down on the floorboard of the car facing down so I didn't know where we were going. And again, I was not going to balk at anything this guy said. He was mean and ugly and big. And so I did everything that I was told. And we didn't drive for very long. I would guess 5 minutes. But when I got out of the car, I was standing in front of a country house, a little white country house. And I quickly learned that this house was a brothel. Obviously, I didn't know that that's what that was at
Mhm.
the time, but I was taken there. I was put in a room. I was seeing men hand money to the brother, and then those men come in the room with me and spend awful time with me while I was there. And then I would be taken back to the school. I would go to the bathroom. I would clean myself up, and I would act like everything was fine. And I remember my classmates or teammates saying how jealous they were that I got to go practice with the high school. And um, I wouldn't do it every practice by any means, but I did it more than once, several times. And I don't know why it stopped after my sixth grade year. Part of me wonders, was it because I was beginning to look more like a woman and less like a child? Like, was that what this group was into? Um, I don't know. But I remember my sixth grade year, I really began to physically hurt. And so, mind you, like I hadn't processed any of this bad stuff. I was really only remembering and focusing on the good things about my coach, this
Hmm.
good relationship that I thought we had. But yet, I would have flashbacks where I would see a different man's face on top of me. And I would have nightmares that didn't make sense. I would see myself in a place that I didn't know where it was or how I had gotten there, things that just didn't make sense. And a kid doesn't know what a flashback is. And so I
Right.
had no way of explaining that to anybody, nor did I want to because I felt crazy. But I began to hurt in my heart and in my gut, and I began to cut and self harm, and teachers would see it, and even my family would see it. And I was told, that's just chicken scratch. You're just doing that for attention.
Okay. Yeah.
And you know what? I just want to say that any child who is self harming, first of all, don't say it's for attention, but in some cases, maybe it is.
Hmm.
Maybe they do need somebody to recognize that they're hurting so badly that this is the only option they see, because it's not normal to cut. No healthy child is going to cut,
I agree.
especially, yeah. So, uh, I've had other people comment or reach out to me and say, so and so's cutting, and I really think it's for attention. Okay, maybe that doesn't.
Hmm.
It's not a shaming thing, you know. That means
It
something.
does make sense. Yeah, I remember growing up, and there was a friend of mine that was starting to cut, and a lot of people did say that, oh, they just want attention, they want, all the people focusing on them, and you're right, they need. There was something, and I don't want to say, I know, I because I haven't asked them if I could even talk about their what happened, but something was happening in their life that was how it was expressing itself.
Exactly.
They didn't know how to say it, so they were cutting themselves.
Yeah.
And it was so they needed attention. So that's very important what you're saying. Like, yeah, they're seeking attention, but you got to go deeper than that and find out why.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and sometimes it's that the emotional pain is so heavy that physical pain actually relieves some of that emotional pain.
Hmm.
But a
Right.
kid doesn't know that. They just know it's something that ease the pain a little bit.
Right.
My seventh grade year, I actually had enough of a flashback where I was able to recognize I was raped. I knew I was. And so I told some friends one day, and they told the teacher, who told the principal, who called my parents. And I remember I rode the bus home that day. And when I got home, my mom took me in her room and she sat me down on her bed and she said, Rachel, this is what was told to me. And I said, yes. And she said, you're lying. And I
Wow.
said, no, mom, I'm not. And she said, yes, you are. You're lying. And I said, no, mom, I'm not. And she said, yes, you are. And I said, okay, I'm lying. And I remember she went and told my dad, she's lying. She's made it all up for attention. And my dad then took me to the person's house who had legitimately raped me
Hmm.
and put me into his house. I sat in the living room and I had to apologize. And I sat there as he cried like a baby, as if, how could she ever say this about me? We had to contact the elders of that man's church and apologize for what I said about him. We had to apologize, or I was taken to the friend's house that I had told, and I had to apologize to their parents. I had to apologize to the principal of my school. Um, and I pretty well vowed at that point, okay, I'm never going to talk about this again, because I truly believed, okay, something's wrong with me.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. You finally realize what's going on, and then you want to go, like, and then also, because you were saying about disassociation, and I've interviewed a lot of people who've been part of the SRA and other victims, and that's one thing that's very common, is that they kind of have a split personality, and then when something the traumatic events happening, they go to a different. They just block this whole chunk out, and so
Mm.
that's something that's very very common. At least what I'm hearing and reading about in my research is that is very normal. It's a defense mechanism, as you were saying, kind of like to preserve your mind, I guess, to break away from that. But so when you said that, I totally understand what you're saying there, Rachel, because I've heard people say that. But I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes when you're going and you realize what's going on. You're going to the people that are supposed to be protecting you. They don't believe you, and then you're made to apologize to the people doing this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think part of the problem too was back then people were not educated on what dissociation is,
right.
how trauma or PTSD is handled, because I think part of my story didn't make sense. And so it was just, that's a lie. And instead of figuring out what pieces of truth were in this, because a kid's not going to be able to tell you A to Z, this is what happened,
Hmm.
especially if you're like me and had several instances of abuse
Right.
and you have memories that mesh together. You don't necessarily know how you got to a place, but you can see and feel the actual attack. Like it a kid's not going to be able to just, oh, blah blah blah, this is what happened,
Right.
and make sense. And I think that's super important. If a child is coming to you sharing with you something that was abusive to them and it doesn't totally make sense, that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Exactly. Great point.
So um, we did move in the course of all of this, and so I was not living quite as close to my coach as I had been. But I finished out my 8th grade year there at the school, and him and I remained very close. He continued to call me out of class all the way through 8th grade. There was one time I remember, again, he was going through those mind games where he wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. And I actually brought to school a note filled with money to give to him because I had seen money exchanged on my behalf. And so I thought maybe this is what he wants in order to want me again. And I didn't even know that that's what I was doing, but
Right.
I literally gave him money, thinking it will make him happy. And so another time he had gotten upset at me. I'm pretty sure it was after the time I had come forward my 7th grade year. He had gotten really upset at me, and um, his classroom was in this trailer, and uh, so it was him and then the other 4th grade teacher and then a closet that connected the two classrooms. I was in the closet and he had me up against a wall, and the other teacher walked in, and she then turned around and walked right back out. And again, those little things then reinforce in a child's mind that this must be normal then.
Right. Yeah.
A teacher would say something if that wasn't normal.
Yeah.
And so it messes with your mind. And as a child, you're not used to seeing adults get in trouble. You're used to seeing kids get in trouble. And so all of that, I think, played a big role in just not fully coming to grips with what I was going through or being able to speak out about what I did understand. Um, Later on in my 8th grade year, my coach and he literally asked if he could take me to a high school basketball game that was going to be out of town. It was just going to be the two of us. We were purposefully devising a plan where we could go out together on a date. And my parents agreed to it. And so he picked me up, just him and we went to this girls' basketball game in a different town. And we only stayed till halftime. And then we left early and listened to it on the radio on the way home, just so I would be able to tell my parents what happened. So I had proof that I was there.
Okay.
But on the way home, he took a different route and he drove through the country, and he pulled alongside the road and stopped and raped me. And that I will, like, it was not the nice coach that I had kind of been used to at times. It was awful. Like, there was a totally different look in his eyes. And that was the last time that I was with him. And I don't know if it was like I don't know what the point of it all was, but it was sick and evil. And after that, I remember being ready to graduate grade school and had invited him to come. Like I wanted him around still because I
Wow.
hadn't processed the bad. Like, like I wanted him around and he would have nothing to do with me at that point. And so I went on to college, still very confused, still very much struggling. I dove into basketball. Like that was my safe place. That was my coping skill. Ended up getting a Division I scholarship. And when you think of a trafficking victim, so many times people picture the movie Taken or even the movie Sound of Freedom.
Yep.
And you picture somebody who is kidnapped or somebody who's living on the streets or a part of a gang or addicted to drugs or at least showing signs like bad student, whatever. I had good grades. I was a good athlete. I had friends. None of those signs that would have indicated that I was a trafficking victim. Went on to college, got my 4-year degree, got married not long after that, and started to have kids. And once I started to have kids, I became a stay at home mom. And this whole time, there were pieces of me that hurt, but I didn't understand why. There would be times I would see my coach in public, and he would still flirt with me when he would see me. And I had always had a weird feeling, but still, I was only remembering the inappropriate, relationship we had as a kid,
Right.
nothing of the extreme. 2014 rolls around and I'm at home and I'm scrolling through Facebook and I come across a post on Facebook from a friend of mine who was saying thank you to my coach for staying after school with her daughter to work on a painting. And in that moment, my whole world fell apart. Like I knew what he was doing with that little girl after school. I knew what was going on and memory after memory after memory flooded my mind and I ran to the bathroom and I puked and puked and puked and I began to cut again. I just the darkness was all of
Right.
a sudden right at the forefront of my mind. My husband came home from work, and I had to be like, "Hey, guess
Did
what?
he know? Did he know about your story at all? Did you ever speak to him about this?
No, I'd never spoke really to anybody about it."
Wow. Okay.
I had mentioned to my mom at one point about, he what my coach was inappropriate at times, but never anything else. In fact, I had asked my coach to sing at my wedding. Like, just to give you an indication of how brainwashed I had been.
Right.
And so here I am now exposing the truth. And my husband was thankfully like, you need to get some counseling. So I started to go to counseling. And my whole goal, really, with counseling at that point was I need to make sure that little girl's okay.
Right.
And so we did an anonymous tip to DCFS. That's what it was called, their CPS in some places. And they went into the school, and my understanding was they asked the coach, and he denied everything. And then they went to that little girl, and since then, her and I have become pretty close. And so I've asked her what that was like, and she said they came in and they asked me, "Has anybody ever hurt you?" And she said no, and that was it. And guys, I'm telling you, if somebody would have come to me in 6th grade and said, "Has anybody ever hurt you?" I would have said no. Like, it wasn't showing me any proof that she was legitimately okay.
Right.
But I also didn't know what else to do. There had been a point where I talked to police. I was considering doing a criminal case coming forward. My family they stopped me from doing that. So I felt like I didn't have any other options. And about 2 weeks after the DCFS report came back unfounded, my coach showed up at my house. And I was in the backyard with my kids. I had 2 kids still at that point. And he walked into my yard and he picked up my little girl who was about 11 months old
Oh
and he
my
walked
God.
into my house. And he put her down and then he backed me up against a wall and told me, if you ever talk about this again, I know people who will hurt your family. And based off of what I was remembering about the truth of my childhood, I knew he did know people who could hurt my family. I remembered the amount of people that would come into that little country brothel And so, without even really making like a distinct decision, I went right back to separating my two worlds of, I kept it a secret from my husband. I didn't tell him that my coach showed up. I went back to trying to act like everything was fine and basically vowed that I'm not going to talk about this anymore.
Right.
But my coach showed up a couple more times, and one time beat me up, where I had to then hide the bruises. And then another time it was him and his brother, and they both actually raped me that time. And it was more of like a hate thing, I could tell, like, because these guys, I don't think, especially my coach, he's into kids, like
Hmm.
it was really just an ugly thing. And this time I remember um not know, like, just being numb. There's something in the brain, I think brachia or something like that, where literally your brain shuts down in a
Right.
traumatic moment and you cannot form words. And that's where I was. And I think I was in shock. And so only by the grace of God did I pick up my phone and I texted my counselor and I said I was just raped. And so she calls and I hang up because I can't form words.
Right.
And
Yeah.
she continues to call and I just keep hanging up. And finally she says, "Come to my office." And so I did. And she said when I walked in, I was very much still in shock. I was shaking, but had no facial, like emotions, anything. And she was able to kind of get out of me what happened. And she said, "There's three things you have to do. You have to tell your husband, you have to go to the hospital, and you have to make a police report." And all three of those felt too scary. And
Right.
I
I
didn't feel,
understand.
yeah, I didn't feel like I could do them. And I remember thinking, my husband's not going to believe me. I still go back in my mind to believing that that's going to be everybody's response.
Hmm.
Um, but at one point, she convinced me, your husband deserves to know.
Right.
And I agreed. And so she actually called him at work and he came and sat in her office while she explained to him what had happened earlier in the day. And he fell apart, but he believed me. And at that point, it really wasn't my choice. We were going to the hospital and we were going to make a police report. And so he took me to the hospital. And I remember I probably got there about 7 o'clock that night or that close to it. And I didn't leave there until close to 6 or 7 the next morning. And that whole process was extremely traumatic. They didn't have a female doctor on staff. Nowadays, they have something called sexual assault nurse examiners. They didn't have one of those then. So I had a male doctor
Oh my
who
God.
basically, you're already in this PTSD
Hmm.
feeling and you're having to make these choices of, if you don't do this, then this man's going to walk free. But by saying yes to doing it, you're basically saying yes to being assaulted again, because
Exactly.
that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
So
I
we did do,
understand that.
yeah, we did do a rape kit. We went through that whole process. It was terrible. And then the police came and I shared with them everything that I could remember that happened. And then it came time to share with them the names of the two individuals, and I couldn't do it. And my husband stood there and he said, "Rachel, either you give them the names or we're going to have to move." And I
Right.
said, "Then I guess we have to move." I was so terrified. Now, I do believe there was a point there where we moved and then we ended up moving again. And my husband was getting different jobs because we were trying to find something where he could make enough pay because I was not at a place where I could work. I was very much in this dark world,
Hmm.
very depressed, eating disorder, just was not doing very well at all. But at one point, even though we lived 45 minutes away, my coach showed back up again. And
Oh
this
my
time he
God.
showed up like with tears and acting like, "Oh, I never meant to do any of these things. This really was not my plan. I just need help. I need to get out of this crap that I'm in." And I think he recognized, because I've ran this through my mind over and over again. I think he recognized, number one, when he was at my house the very first time, that when
Hmm.
I stood in front of him, I was not an adult. I was still that 9-year-old little girl when he was in the room. he still had that control over me. I still did not feel like I could tell him no. It didn't even feel like a choice. And
Okay.
so when he stood there again and he said, tonight a truck is going to come and it's going to rev its engines. And when you hear that, you need to leave and get in the truck. I, I did exactly what he told me to do. And so I got in that truck and I was taken to a hotel about a mile from my house, and I was raped for 3 hours, and then was taken back to my house where I cleaned myself up just like I had done as a kid. And I got back in bed with my husband and I acted like everything was fine. And this then continued. Once I did it that first time, like there was no getting out. And at that point, they're threatening my family, my kids. And in the same sense, like I felt like this is all I'm worth anyway. This is what I was as a child. This is really all that I am. Like I believed all the lies that was said over me. I believed I didn't have a choice. And so for almost a year, I lived this double life again. And I experienced things like brothels out in the country again, but this time it was in a camper. I experienced seeing other individuals out there being sold, and women and people that I couldn't save that I wanted to save. Like I experienced driving on the road and wanting to just drive my car into the next telephone pole because that felt like the right thing to do. Like at least it would save everybody from having to deal with me and this mess I had become.
Right.
The only thing that stopped me was knowing that somebody was going to have to sit my kids down and tell them what happened to their
Right.
mom. And I wasn't willing for that to happen. And so I would bits and pieces give it to people, seeing if there was anybody who could help me, who could handle what I was going through. And really, I didn't find much help. Granted, I wasn't telling them much, but at one point, there was a lady at this church that we started to go to. She was an elder's wife, and something about her felt safe. And so again, I gave her little bits and pieces and I said, hey, I have this eating disorder. Would you pray for me? And she, absolutely, I will pray for you. And she would send me text messages of encouragement, and she would stop in and pray with me. And anytime I saw her, she'd give me a big hug. And so I'd tell her a little bit more and a little bit more because she was showing to be trustworthy and that she
Right.
really did care. And eventually, one night, I remember I texted her and I just said, hey, what would you have done if one of your daughters had come to you and said that they had been hurt?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her response was nothing like my mom's response. And she pretty well figured out at that point that something must have happened to me as a kid. And so she dropped everything and came to my house that night and picked me up, and we drove around. And the way that she describes that drive, I was basically still a shell of a person. Like I didn't cry. I didn't show any facial expressions. There was nothing. I was empty. I gave her a little bit of my story from when I was a child. And I remember her saying, a lot of times men will abuse children for power.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I said, yeah, or money. And her jaw dropped open and she couldn't believe it. She said, I knew that trafficking existed in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea it was in my backyard. And I'll never forget, she looked at me and said, you've told the right person. This is not okay. And we're going to make sure that he stops. And at that point, she didn't even know that he was still continuing to hurt me. Over the course of a little bit more time, she began to see the bruises and the cuts that I would try to hide. And she realized I was still being harmed. And so one night I was at home. I still remember I was making spaghetti and a knock came at the door, and I opened it, and there stood her. I call her Granny in my book.
Mm-hmm.
There stood Granny and her husband. And I was like, hey, what are you guys doing here? And she said, your husband deserves to know. And my fight or flight kicked in, and I grabbed my car keys and I took off running. And luckily, my husband grabbed me and picked me up to where my feet literally couldn't touch the ground. And she told him everything.
Right.
And I thought, this is it. He's going to leave. He's going to take my kids. Like everything's over. And he said, I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere. And we called the police and they came and they did a report. And this time I gave the names. And I remember signing that police report. It took me over an hour to just sign it, because in my mind, I legitimately thought I would be the one that would go to jail, because they had poured that into me that I would be the one that would get in trouble, not them. And so I finally signed it. That was like a Friday or a Saturday. By Monday morning, I was at the state police with Granny and one of her daughters. And I was taken down this long hallway by two officers, put in a very small room with a camera pointed at me, and told to share my story. And I did to the best of my ability. And they told me, you then need to go find a safe place to stay, probably not your house for a time. And so me and my family, we did. We stayed with some friends. And one day, Granny came over and she said, Rachel, it happened. And I was like, what happened? She's like, well, they did a raid on your coach's house and his brother's house, and they took him into custody. And I thought, this is it. Like, finally, like, this is finally.
Really? Yeah.
And so, let's see. So they didn't find anything in their house right away that was like, oh, you deserve to be arrested. They were going to have to go through all of the devices, which was going to take time. And so they ended up letting them go after they had questioned them in custody for a while. And I was told, you need to go and get an emergency restraining order. And so I did. I went to the courthouse, got a 2-week restraining order. I was informed that in order to make it a 2-year restraining order, you're going to have to come back and stand before the judge. And just so you know, the defendants can be there for that. Most likely they won't show up, but they can. They have that right. And so
Okay.
the day came for me to go back for that, to basically extend it to a 2-year restraining order. And I knew they would be there. And everybody's like, no, they're not going to show their face. As we turned the corner of the courthouse, I saw the brother walking into the courthouse. And I hid in the back seat of the car and was not going to budge. And the daughter of Granny, she actually pulled. I don't know how or what all she said that gave me the strength to get out of that car. And they basically drugged me into that courthouse because I was terrified, but they knew this is the only way she's going to stay safe. Like, it has to happen. And so we went up, and it was on the 3rd floor. We went up to this courtroom. And before I walked in, I was informed that the entire right side of the courtroom was filled with my coach's church family and his friends supporting him.
Wow.
And many people that I knew. And there's no way I could walk out there. I was mortified and scared and all the things. And so I ended up going in the judge's chambers and kind of explained, but because I didn't testify or whatever in front of the judge and the defendant, they were not going to be able to give me a restraining order. So after that, I then started to have meetings with the FBI, and I had an incredible FBI agent. She was amazing. She would sit down with me and Granny, and there would be times when I would be struggling so much to be able to explain, some of the abuse that I had been through, that I would be under the table in protection mode.
Right.
And this amazing FBI agent would crawl under the table with me and would listen to me from under there. And of course, Granny would come down too. And but
That's a rare agent to do that. Wow.
right, like, instead
Yeah.
of looking at me like a mental case, like, she understood. She was trauma informed. And so I remember, sitting there in that room, and I didn't know faces of the men that I had seen as an adult come in and pay for us, but I was able to point them out at different times, and Granny knew names and I knew the faces. And so we were able to give this FBI agent some names, and she was able to find through bank accounts how they were all connected and had been sending thousands of dollars to each other. And she told me, she said, Rachel, this goes all the way down to Mexico. And she said, it's a massive ring. And so she also informed me at one point, she said, I can't come out and just say it, but I'm going to share an analogy with you. She always talked in analogies, but she said, if we were going into your coach's house looking for candy, we found candy. In other words, if they were going in looking for child porn, they found it. And so she told me it'll just be a matter of time. We have to finish going through all of the devices before we're going to be able to arrest him and take him into custody. And so I was feeling really good about it. This whole time, he was not allowed to teach or coach until they had come back with whatever they had found from the raid. And about, well, I don't even know how long it was, maybe 2 months after that, I get word that he's back teaching. And I was like,
What?
how is that even possible? And
Oh my.
I called the FBI agent and she said, this has never happened before. The forensic guy called me and he was literally in tears, but it's all been botched, messed up, whatever. There's nothing that they can do to now uh, accuse him of anything. Without the evidence, he's free to go. And so
Oh
he's
my
free to
God.
go back to teaching. And I didn't even know that that was possible. And it was devastating. But at that point, police completely stopped listening to me. I truly feel like whatever was on his devices, like everything changed at that moment for me. Um, and this part, I don't know if it was coincidence. I think it was, but that FBI agent was transferred to Kansas City, a totally different place. And so she was no longer on my case. Um, and all law enforcement, not, I don't want to say all, but a lot of law enforcement wouldn't even listen to me. And so here I was, I still had men showing up at my house at times. I remember one time, like it had gotten to the point where um, police wouldn't even hardly respond to phone calls or whatever. And so Granny had taught me, you pull out your phone and you turn on your video camera and you
Right.
confront these guys and you get them off your property. Like they don't want to be recorded. And
Exactly.
so
Yep.
we had cameras set up all around our house. And this guy shows up at my house and he's got a bag full of things. He's got a black whip in his back pocket and he drops 3 condoms on my sidewalk. And I had messaged Granny real quick what was going on. And so I then turned my phone camera on and I went out there and I confronted him and I said, get off my property. And he said, but I've already paid for you. And I said, I don't know who you paid, but you're not coming in my house. It wasn't me and this isn't happening. And it took a little convincing and he finally left, thankfully. As he pulled out, I saw his license. Granny, she hightailed it over to my house and she actually parked perpendicular in the road to where it was only one way in, one way out, and he couldn't get out. And so she got out and she said, I've got your license. Tell me your name and the website she's for sale on. And so he did. And she let him go. And then she came to my house and she had called the cops. And so, however long later, they showed up. We gave them the footage, the license, the name, the website. And weeks started to pass and we gave him a call and like, where's everything at with that? And they said the license was not registered. The name was a fake name and the state's attorney will not agree to look into the website. And so that was it. Nothing was done. And it continued, like I continued to be harassed. I continued to have men show up. I continued to be followed at times. Like life was just not safe. And no matter how badly I wanted to stay there close to Granny, because she's the first person to believe me, she's the person who literally saved my life, it became very apparent we had to move just for safety reasons. And so this time we moved far away. And over the course of, so that was 2020 when we actually moved. And it was at that point where, see, I had written my book 4 years prior and had
Okay.
no intention of ever publishing it. It was really just for my own healing.
Mm-hmm.
But when all of this came, it was like, okay, either I'm going to shine a light on these guys or I'm going to have to go in complete hiding. One or two is going to have to happen. And I had kids and I didn't want them to have to live a life of hiding. And but this middle ground of kind of speaking out and kind of not seemed to be the most dangerous. And so I decided to shine a light on the darkness and I published my book. And we moved, and through time, I wasn't hearing anything. Like I didn't publicize my book. I didn't promote it on social media. Like I didn't have a presence on social media at that point. I was hiding. And I didn't really hear anything about it for a while until March of 2021. Um, Somebody posted on Facebook about my book and said,
Mm-hmm.
basically, why is nobody talking about this? Like
Exactly.
all of us who were in his classroom saw these things. We saw
Mm-hmm.
what he was doing. We know this is true. And one by one, people started to say, yeah, I saw it. I saw how he treated Rachel. I saw the relationship they had. Some of them said, yeah, he was grooming me too. He was touching me too. He was, I mean, just one after another came forward
Right.
and I couldn't believe it. And all of a sudden, they created this Facebook group of support for me. Because, mind you, when everything had fallen apart, law enforcement wise, people believed that he was wrongfully accused until they read my side of the story. And they were able to see she has been in her house. There's no way she could know the things that she knows. There was a there was a lot that made sense now as to, okay, this did happen. um, at that point, the church where he was an elder at did have him step down, and he was allowed to still attend. But people like this, they want to be in power. And
Mm-hmm.
so he left that church and he found another church where he could then lead singing and be in power and be an elder. He still has his people who believe he's innocent. And uh, criminally, I've not been able to do anything. But I will say this, and I can't talk a ton about it, but I am in the
Right. Yes,
process
I
of
understand.
fighting. I am in the process of fighting them civilly, and it's not what I had hoped. You know, criminal is what I had hoped, but it's something. And my hope is a guilty verdict will help people realize this guy is not safe. Um, so
Right.
that's kind of been my journey through all of this. And from it, once I have finally gotten safe and we moved far enough away, I am now being able to heal, because when you're in the chaos of it all, you can't heal. You have to be safe to be able to heal. And so I've been able to do a lot of healing and get a lot of help from different people. And now starting my own nonprofit and helping other trauma and trafficking survivors and sharing my story and just being loud about it.
Yes.
My hope is it'll shine a light on this darkness.
Absolutely. And I think you are absolutely. I mean, Rachel, it's such a powerful story, and I'm so glad that you are able to talk about it and bring people the information of what happened to you. And I think it's we need more people speaking out. And I kind of thought when you were saying, what on Facebook people started, it's great that people finally started coming forward and saying, she's telling the truth. This happened to me. And but where I just wonder, where were these people when it was happening? Why weren't they speaking out then? And it's just frustrating, but I also understand that it's the fear. And there's a lot. I understand why people don't speak out, but at least they finally did, to say that
Hmm.
you were telling the truth. I mean, I just wish, I'm sure the same as you, that they would have done it a lot sooner, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But you know,
And when I hear, like, I don't know all of the stories by any means, but some of them that I have heard, they did try. They did go to like the superintendent
hmm,
or to my parents or whatever, and they were shut down every time. And so,
right,
um, I think it's important to, if you are speaking out on behalf of a child, don't stop with just telling one person.
right. Yeah, and what's really disturbing too is when you were telling your story and you were talking about how they were gathering the evidence. It shows how, like we were saying, how deep this goes and how wide this web is. I think a lot of, I think you summed it up great. People think it's going on in other countries and it's not happening in their backyard. But what's shocking is they're gathering this evidence and then they lose it. Apparently, they don't know where all the information went. That is showing you that there is definitely a cover up. There's somebody there in higher places calling the shots and stopping these investigations and making evidence disappear. That
Mm-hmm.
that's serious, and that's not an easy thing to do. So it's showing you how what you're up against. And I would imagine, and I can only go by what I'm thinking, but you're saying, like, what was on that phone and what was on his devices, obviously something that could probably incriminate a lot of important people.
That's
So
my guess. Yeah.
yeah, it's like we got to get rid of this. This has to go away because who knows what's on there. It's
Hmm.
like a blackmail. That's, I think, how a lot of this gets is allowed to continue. and is because of the blackmail aspect of it. They had, they could blackmail people because they have photographs or they have whatever that they can use against them. So it makes sense why this was happening
Yeah.
and things were disappearing. But yeah, it's just that's what I was thinking when you were saying that part of your story.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
messed up.
it's totally messed up. And what I want, what I wanted to ask you though is like, I have a like I was thinking when as because you went to authority figures through like several times during your this going on in your life, you did reach out and try to tell certain people, and they didn't believe you. And I mean that what how did that make you look at authority figures growing up? Did it shape your opinion? And I'm really, and I also, that's my one question. Then also with the church, how did what, how did this, how did this affect your opinion of authority figures and of the church? Did it form in different ways? I'm just really curious how this affected you growing up, because as I said, you reached out to people, nobody believed you, nobody really listened, or they just kind of ignored you. And then because I know the church aspect, so I just like to get your thoughts, and if you could
Yeah.
let people know how that happened, what was
So
going on.
I think with the authority figures, it could go one of a few ways. And, you could either become angry and, hateful towards authority figures and not
Hmm.
trusting of them, or you can feel that way about yourself. And that's where I landed. I landed with thinking something's wrong with me, not something's wrong with them. Because continuously I was denied validation
Hmm.
and belief. I felt like it was it has to be me then. Something has to be wrong with me. Um, and so that's probably one of the uh, things that I've dealt with the most, even and also with the church and in regard to God. I think it could be the same way. You could be extremely angry at God for the pain that you've been through and the circumstances you've faced. Or in my situation, I thought something is wrong with me. There's must be a reason why God can't protect or doesn't want to protect me. Why this happened? Something has to be wrong with me. I never blamed God for it. Again, I just felt like maybe I'm just a little bit lower than everybody else. Maybe this is my lot in life, and it. I'm grateful that I wasn't angry at God, but I
Hmm.
was still totally missing who he was and where he was in all of this. And it took a lot of going ahead and trying to see how he sees me. There was a point where a minister had me go through the book of Psalms and highlight every characteristic of God. And I did. And, one of the characteristics that I kept seeing was he's a protective God. And I thought, how? Like
Right. Yeah.
now, I was somebody who believed the word of God to be true, 100% true. And so I was like, how is he a protective God? Like, have you seen my life?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I realized there's no reason why I should be okay right now. There's no reason why I should still love God right now, except for he had to have protected my heart and my soul in those moments. I should be out there doing the same abuse to other people that was done to me, but I'm not. Yes, I was hurt physically and mentally and emotionally, but God protected the most important pieces of me, and that was my heart and my soul. And so I was
Amen.
beginning to see him through that lens. And I was beginning to see that he was there through all of it. And he hurt with me. He's not a God who just sits up on his throne, but he was in my heart through all of that. And it felt every bit of pain that I did with me
Right.
so that I didn't have to do it alone. And so it took time for me to really see God for who he is, because I was seeing everything in life through the lens of the abuse I had been through.
Right.
And I had to change that lens and see it for the truth of what it was. And so I am so grateful, and only by the grace of God do I feel a super big connection with with
Right.
the church and with Him. And um, my desire now is to just never stop drawing close to Him. Like that's truly where I am finding my peace and my comfort every day.
Right. Amen. Yeah, no, that's it's true. It could have went so differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I do I believe that too, that he did protect your heart and your soul. And now you're out, you're exposing what's going on, and shining a light on it. And it's, as we were saying, that's so important right now, especially now. I talk about so much in my shows that we have to start protecting children. And I mean, that's a whole other show, but I mean, they're really targeting the family unit. I've been talking about this for years. They're really doing everything they can to destroy the family bond, which I think is so important. Something that we're lacking is this
Oh,
is
I agree.
yeah, they're just really doing everything they can to break up the family, because they realize how powerful it is. So I always like to bring on people to talk about that, and to how we have to start really protecting the children. And you talking about this, and I hope people realize, like you were saying, this is so much bigger than you think. It's like, I don't
Mhm.
think people realize it's all around. And I think a lot of people think, like you were saying earlier, Rachel, like it's going on far away. It's going, they, because people, yeah, I get trafficking's going on, but they don't realize that this web, and I call it a web of evil, which it is. It's world encompassing, and it's happening in your city, my city, probably in our neighborhoods.
Yes.
And that's what has to be exposed. And you're not. I'm so grateful that you're here doing this, to bring light to it and talk about it. I'm going to keep talking about it. I know it's uncomfortable. I know people don't like to hear it, but that it still has to be talked about, and people have to start realizing what's going on. And
Yeah.
so it's amazing that you're doing that. And I also want to say, kudos to your husband for sticking through and
Yes.
sticking by you. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
married 25 years, and my wife has been, because of my physical condition that I deal with, my ankylosing spondylitis, she's been there through the so much crap like that I've
Yeah.
had to deal with, and my mood swings, and just all the crap that comes with being having a chronic ailment. And I'm just really wanted to say, like, that's amazing that your husband believed you, and he's been there by your side, and he's there with you. I think that's so important to point out,
Uh-huh.
because not a lot of people have that support. And
Yes.
Granny,
Oh,
of course.
kudos to him for sure. Like he deserves it. But I also want you to know, like when I hear that, I don't know if this is the case for you as it was for me.
Hmm.
But I often felt bad that he stuck by me because I thought, he
Yes.
could have so much better than me, and so I almost would feel guilty.
Yep.
And I just want you to know that she's lucky to have you too.
Oh, thank you. And I felt that way too, Rachel. A lot of the times, and I feel like I'm a burden sometimes, and I'm like, why, like I do, I get exactly what you're saying. It's this weird feeling that I get, and totally unvalid. Like when I say that, I'll even say that to my wife. Like,
Right.
I don't get why are you sticking around? Like, you could do better. And I would say these things, and she's like, that's not true.
Hmm.
Like, it's something that I had to deal with myself. It was something coming from me, like
Yeah.
internally, that had to be fixed.
Yeah.
And
I agree. And
it's really important.
I want to share too. I've met a lot of people through this journey, from safe houses to online trauma groups or whatever, but friends whose story is very much like mine. I think, we don't realize that trafficking often looks more like my version of it because it can look
Mhm.
so many different ways. But majority of the time, a trafficking victim does still get to go home. They still sleep in their own bed at night. And oftentimes it's somebody that they know. 95% of the time, it's
Mhm.
somebody that they know. One
Yep.
of my friends, her dad was a drug addict, and so in order to get his drug money, he would sell her on Saturdays, and it would be in her basement every Saturday. And like she still went to school, she still was in church, like she still nobody picked up on the signs, and that was just normal for her. And she's not going to tell on her dad, she doesn't want to be taken away from her dad. Like we don't always understand that love bond that you
Mhm.
have with the perpetrator. But it is often they do that purposefully, but it's often what keeps a kid silent.
Right.
But so often it can be a kid in our school and in our churches, on our baseball teams, basketball teams, like there could be in your kids' friend group. It's
You're right.
And then to throw a whole other angle at it, you can be trafficked without anybody ever laying a hand on you because of your phone.
I remember in one of your interviews, I was just going to bring this up. I'm glad you did, Rachel, because I remember one of your interviews, and it hit me like a hammer when you said it in the one interview I listened to. Like, you don't have to even be. You can be in your house and you're still trafficked with
Hmm.
through your phone or the internet. So
Yes,
I think people think that you get thrown in a van and you're whisked away. That does happen, but I've never heard anyone say that but you. That you don't need to be trafficked. It can happen in your own bedroom while you're
yes,
sitting there.
yeah. And
Wow.
the definition of trafficking is sexual acts are sold, whether by force, fraud, or coercion. Well, let's say your child is in their bedroom on their phone and they're playing a game and they get messaged by another kid that says they're in the same area. Hey, do you want to play, posing as a kid?
Hmm.
And then just in conversation, the kid asks, hey, do you have any siblings or whatever? And yeah, I got a sister. And then before long, all of a sudden you realize this isn't a kid, this is a grown man. And he says, if I don't send a picture of my sister or of me, or if I don't send a picture of me, he's going to hurt my sister. And he's been able to figure out where my device is from. He gives enough information, or maybe I've given him enough information that now I feel unsafe. And all that this kid knows to do is to go ahead and send the picture. What's the big deal? Well, then once you do, then, well, I'm going to show this to your parents if you
Hmm.
don't send a video. I'm going to do this if you don't meet me at the corner of, these two roads. And before long, that child can be taken. But even if not, those pictures that child sent are sold, they're trafficked
Hmm.
in your house with you next in the next room over, and nobody laid a hand on them.
Absolutely. And I think parents really need to hear this. I think that's so powerful, Rachel, what you just said. I really do, because I see people on social media, they put all of their business out there. I mean, and it frustrates me because I see it on Facebook, and people will put their children's pictures out there, their information, everything where they go to school, and I'm just thinking this is such a prime hunting
Mm.
ground
Yes.
for these predators, because you've got all the information there, you just give it to them. And then you're how many parents are really monitoring what their children are watching on the internet, what social groups they're involved in, who they're chatting with.
Yes.
There's this is just I come from a time when there was no internet. Believe it or not, guys, I'm dating myself, but there was when I was little, there was no internet, and when I was even a teenager, there was no internet. This wasn't something. This is a new thing, relatively new, and I just think parents need to get more involved. And really, if I did have a child, I would be so in their business on the internet. I would want to know every person they're talking with, what their sites they're going to, because of what you're speaking. And I think people have to realize this. You're hearing this happening all the time. What you
Hmm.
brought up.
Yeah.
So
So, I
wow.
mean, just a couple more things to explain with this. You would never send your kid alone to the most dangerous part of the country, but yet we're sending them alone into this world of internet that is
Hmm.
just as dangerous. There's so many predators online right now that their whole purpose of being online is to trick your kid.
Yep.
And the United States, unfortunately, is number one in the world with producing and distributing child porn. And we as a country and our law enforcement cannot even keep up with the amount of child porn that is coming through. They have to pick the worst of the worst to investigate because they can't keep up with how many are coming in. That's how awful and much of an epidemic we're dealing with child porn and trafficking and devices.
Yeah. It's such a big problem. I always say that, and I'll keep saying it. People have to realize how bad this problem is and how widespread it is and how deep it really goes. I say it goes right to the top.
Mm,
Like it's really that rampant, and it's starting to get some traction. Like I said with the movie, and people are starting to really with talk about it a bit more. But it needs to be talked about even more, I think, and people have to become aware of this, and especially parents if they have children. I think you make up great points. What I wanted to ask you, Rachel, to kind of bring this full circle, is if somebody's going through this, has been a victim of this, or what was your process of healing? I know that you said you had to get away finally to a safe area where you could start your healing, and I think that's so important to kind of talk about, because a lot of people might really be going through what you did or know somebody. And I get the, you have to find yourself a safe area. You have to feel safe. But
Mhm.
what was the process of your recovery? How did it begin after that? Like, what were the steps that you had to go through?
Yeah, so I mean, I think first and foremost is finding somebody who believes you, who sees you, and who is willing to walk this journey with you. And that's unfortunately not super easy. But I think had it not been for Granny in my life, I don't believe I would be alive right now. Once she started to show confidence and remind me of my worth and things like that, then I was able to take the stand to move away and continue my healing journey. And for a long time, there was a lot of writing. I have learned that when I write about whether it's a flashback or about a particular memory, it moves it to a different part of my brain where it's no longer in the forefront and I'm constantly battling it. So, writing it has been very therapeutic. Doing a lot of inner child work has been very therapeutic because, like I said, I would go nine, is the way that I say it, whenever I was entering a situation with my coach. But yet, there were times when I would be triggered, he would be thousands of miles away, and I would be triggered and still go nine because of whatever situation I'm in. And so I
Hmm.
had to do a lot of child work, inner child work, to work on that healing and reminding her she's safe and you don't have to, take over in these scary moments. I'm an adult and I can take care of us type thing. I had to process, I had to feel, deal in order to heal from my trauma. But once I had done that, there came a point where it was like, okay, I've ran this into the ground and I still feel lousy. And I realized through a life coach that I got to know that I am still stuck to it. And I need to begin to make my calling and my dreams and my purpose bigger than my past. And so that was really when I things started to shift for me. A major turning point for me was also when I let go of my eating disorder. That was my number one coping skill. It's what I held to, clung to every moment of the day as my comfort, believing that God wasn't able to be that for me. And it wasn't until I said enough is enough and I laid it down for the last time and I literally clung to God as my comfort and peace did everything change. And He filled me like I've never been filled before. And it
Hmm.
sounds cliche, and I've heard other people say it, and I'm like, yeah, right, guys, like legitimately, it changed my life. And I'm functioning better. Just to give you an example, I use Google Calendar. I had used it for a time and I'm starting to use it again. But I went back on it to fill in all of these things, podcasts I'm getting to do now and these business opportunities of sharing my story and all of this. And I realized that a year ago, the only things that I had on my Google Calendar were take my meds, Bible time, take a rest, pick up the kids from school, and take your evening meds. That was it. And
Hmm.
that was a full day for me. And so now it's like seeing the transformation that God's done in my life. It's remarkable. And so, I mean, that's been the biggest thing for my healing journey.
Absolutely. I mean, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking about my spiritual journey too. Um, you make such great points, and you're right. I've always written. I journal, and it's
Good.
something I find so helpful. And sometimes I'm just scribbling words, and there's not even, I read back some of my journals. I'm like, this makes no sense. But at the time, it was like a pressure valve, I guess, and it was kind
Yeah.
of like just everything blowing off, like just writing everything that was there. And I like the way you said it. Kind of gets it out of the forefront. Like it's not something you're dwelling on. And another game changer, it's how similar our coping. Like I remember too, like my whole life evolved around my condition, and
Mm.
it was like from the time I got up till I went to bed, I was letting my condition run me. My whole
Yeah.
schedule was based around that, and it wasn't until, like you, the examples you gave, you start engaging in life again. You have to do the inner work. That process has to happen first, like you said.
Yeah.
confronting your inner child. I call it shadow work. I had to work on myself, and then, but the key was so important after that part was re-engaging in positive things in my life and becoming active. I think that a lot of people like get stuck in that process of not living. They're just kind of
Yeah.
existing and letting the condition, their trauma repeat, and it's just this endless cycle. I think it's so powerful what you're saying that, do the work on yourself, embrace your spirituality, and then engage again. Like start
Yes.
introducing things back into your life. I think that's very powerful and very true in my case even.
That's awesome.
Wow. Amazing, Rachel. And also, before we wrap up, I want to make sure, can you is there any place people can go? I know you work with people, and is there any websites that you want people to know, so I can put links in the description, guys?
Yeah.
If they want to pick up your book, anything that you want people to know, or where they can find you, I want to make sure I provide that.
Yeah. So Open Blind Eyes is the book that I've written that is my story. And you can find that pretty well at any bookstore, but Amazon's probably the easiest. I also have written a trauma program called Reflecting Ownership, and it comes with a book and then a workbook. And we're actually going to be starting as a group going through that in September through our Stop Suffering in Silence organization. And if you want to reach out and potentially join that with us, our website is stopsuffering.org. And you can also email me. I see I have my own personal website, racheltimothy.com, and you can contact me there. But yeah, we have our own podcast, Stop Suffering in Silence. You can find me on social media by
Incredible.
searching for Stop Suffering in Silence.
Perfect. And I'll make sure, Rachel, I leave all those links in the description, guys. So please go check out Rachel's sites. If you have any questions for her, reach out to her. And start getting involved, and I'll make sure I provide those, as I said, those links. And I want to thank you, Rachel, so much for taking the time to come and speak to me and to everyone else and telling your story, which, I mean, it's not an easy story to tell, I'm sure, but it's so powerful and needs to be told. And I mean, I admire your courage and your strength for being able to do that. I think it shows people that you can get through this, and that it has to be talked about. I love the way you said that you have to shine a light on it. That's the one thing that evil hates, is
Yes.
exposure and the light. It runs from the light, and that's why
Yeah.
I'm so telling people you have to shine light on this stuff, because that's what it does not want.
Yeah.
So your story, I mean, you're just so powerful, and just keep doing what you're doing, Rachel. You're an incredible woman, and
Aw, thank you.
you're definitely helping people and making change, and that's an incredible journey. I think it's
Yeah.
so powerful.
Purpose for the pain.
Exactly. So thank you so much. And do you just want to wait in the background while I just wrap up the show? 30 seconds.
Absolutely. Okay,
Perfect.
thank
All right.
you.
Not a problem. So I'll be right back, Rachel. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Well, there you have it, guys. An incredible interview with an incredible woman. Please, I'm going to provide all the links in the description, as I just said. So if you want to go check out Rachel's work and any of her interviews, please go and check it out. And please pick up her book, because I mean, it's an incredible read. So you can find it, as you said, on Amazon, Open Blind Eyes. And as I keep saying, guys, shine light on the evil. It doesn't like it. And we have to talk about this. It has to be exposed. And it slowly is, but we need more people talking about this. So thank you so much once again, Rachel, for taking the time to come and speak with me, and to all of us. Thank you, everybody watching and listening, for taking the time. And I will be back very, very soon with another incredible interview touching on another topic. So thank you, guys. Stay safe, and I'll be back with another one very soon.